Well, we are now less than 2 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. And beyond that, of course, we've got the presidential election, the general election taking place in November. And the big question on so many of our minds is, how secure will this election be? Clearly, we're watching right now as the left is attempting ballot rigging operations in places like Colorado and Maine. And that's not overstatement. They're literally removing Trump's name from the ballot. What is that if not ballot rigging? Of course it is. It is ballot rigging. And here to tell us about what else is happening with our elections is a guy who's studied our election system for his whole career. Hans Von Spakovsky is here. He's the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Hans, good to have you with us, sir.
Well, thanks for having me.
That is, every so often I do check in with you and I say, okay, what does it look like right now? How are things shaping up? We have seen a bunch of states change laws since 2020. Is it to our benefit?
It depends on what state you're in, and it's really a mixed bag. And it probably doesn't surprise you to know that many of the generally considered red states have improved things. You know, states like Texas and Georgia, for example, have extended their voter ID laws to cover not just in-person voting, but also absentee balloting,
Right.
which so many people do now. On the other hand, Michigan, for example, passed a horrible referendum that gutted their voter ID law. You have Pennsylvania, the governor there, on his own initiative, without a statute giving him authority to do it, putting in automatic voter registration, which is the quickest and fastest way to get people who aren't actually eligible to vote, like aliens, on the voter roll. So, you know, it depends on where you are. If you're voting in some states, like I said, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, places like that, things have improved a lot. But if you're voting in places like New York, California, Nevada, those places are very insecure, and in fact, they have in some ways made things worse since the 2020 election.
Yeah, that's not good. So let's talk about Michigan for a second. You said that they watered down their voter ID requirements there?
Yeah, they did it through what I consider to be a very deceptive process. A huge amount of money went in to put a referendum on the ballot. And the referendum made all kinds of changes in the election rules. And any voter reading it, if they'd read the first part of this very long referendum, it talked about how, well, there now will be a requirement that all voters show a photo ID. Well, if you stop there, you as a voter would think, oh, that's great, I'll vote for this. If you kept reading, the fine print was, however, any individual who doesn't have an ID can show up and simply sign a form saying that, yeah, they really are who they say they are, and they get to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a referendum that I think fooled voters, because generally voters overwhelmingly support voter ID.
And that's exactly, well, yeah, we've seen the surveys on that for years, and
Right.
there is no downside, actually, to voter ID. There's only upside to it. As a part of the effort to push that in Michigan, was the lie that black votes would be suppressed if voter ID was required? Was that pushed around at all?
Oh, yeah, that's pushed around every time that any kind of voter ID requirement is there. But look, it's not just state legislators in some states acting badly. Even in the good states, what has happened over the past 3 years is that the left, and it's these huge foundations, the Carnegies, the Ford Foundation, they have been pouring huge amounts of money and giving them to left-wing advocacy organizations who have filed suits to try to stop almost every improvement that states have made. Everything from trying to get voter ID laws thrown out to, in some states, trying to get rid of what has a practice that's been in place for a long time, which is a basic security measure of election officials when they get an absentee ballot, comparing the signature on the absentee ballot with the signature on file for that registered voter. That's just one way of
Yes.
finding if somebody has forged.
Well,
those requirements, they're being sued. States are being told, oh, that's discriminatory. You can't do that.
there's no reason to do any of this unless you're trying to commit fraud or you believe you're the beneficiary of it.
Well, yes. Yeah, that's exactly right, and I'm afraid that's what's going on. Or again, another requirement that's being attacked. States have required this for years all over the country. There's nothing discriminatory about it. States have required often with absentee ballots that there be a witness, a witness who can testify that, yeah, you, the voter, voted that ballot. That's being attacked in litigation by the left too.
You mentioned Pennsylvania. That's an essential state here. I have seen for those of us who want to see conservatives, Republicans prevail. Some promising news. Scott Pressler is often given a lot of credit for this in his activism in Pennsylvania. That Republican registrations are doing very well there. Has that been your finding?
Yeah, and look, a key to elections is, of course, voter registration, but it's not just voter registration. It's getting people to the polls. And that is, it's one thing to register, it's another thing to convince people to go vote. And, that's a political matter quite separate and apart from the administrative rules that govern the election process.
Now, also in Pennsylvania, there were all sorts of obvious problems during the 2020 election that I don't think a lot of people are confident have been fully sorted out. Among them was that the left-wing jurisdictions in the state, places like Philadelphia, were doing something called ballot curing, where they were basically padding the numbers in a way that the red districts were not. They were taking these ballots and then treating them as submitted, and that was the end of it. In your view, has there been any change to that? Is there any update on how so-called ballot curing is done in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think what's happening is that the more conservative jurisdictions are realizing that they've got to do that too. And what curing means, and by the way, some states have actually passed laws. Texas is one that have now put that into statutes. And what it means is that if an absentee ballot comes in, for example, and the voter, perhaps they forgot to sign it, like you're required to under the law, rather than just throwing the ballot out and not counting it, election officials are required to call the voter and say, hey, you forgot to sign your ballot. If you come into our office and sign it, well, then we can consider your ballot. And they give the voter the option to cure the ballot.
You get a mulligan.
You get a mulligan. But that's only fair if every election official in every county is doing that. If only some counties or cities are doing it, perhaps in the large liberal areas, well, then that's an unfair advantage. And it's got to be done uniformly across the state if you're going to allow that.
Yes. It's maddening to me that conservative jurisdictions weren't doing it in the first place, unless they were under the impression that it was illegal.
Well, it was in a lot of states. There was no law allowing you to do that. But since the 2020 election, a number of states have put in statutes allowing and directing election officials to give voters the opportunity to cure their ballots. I don't have a problem with that at all, as long as it's being done uniformly across the state.
Sure. But also, doesn't it give mail-in ballots an advantage that in-person ballots don't have?
Well, to some extent, yes. Although look, when you're voting in person, if you make a mistake, for example, if you go to feed your paper ballot into the computer scanner and you've made a mistake and the computer scanner actually rejects it, you have the ability to go ask election officials questions, and they can try to help you if needed. So I'm not sure it gives you an advantage, but absentee ballots, no matter what you do to try to make them more secure, people have to realize they're the most insecure way of voting.
I started with an assessment of what these states are doing, Colorado and Maine. They're removing Trump from the ballot entirely. Do you agree with me? This is straight up ballot rigging going on?
It is, because they don't have valid legal or constitutional reasons for removing him from the ballot. Hopefully, the Supreme Court will fix this. Last week, just before, right after Christmas, actually, the Colorado State Republican Executive Committee actually filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court asking them to take up the case and to reverse what the Colorado Supreme Court did. I'm hoping the court will take it up and will act very quickly on this. They really have to. They have to take it. They have to act quickly because, good grief, we've got elections coming up starting almost right away.
Yes. Yeah, the left does not have respect for the voters. They really resent the fact that the voters have a say at all. So they're trying to remove their options, quite obviously. Hans Von Spakovsky, Thank you for that. We're going to check back in with you again soon as we get closer to the election because hopefully the picture keeps improving. Thank you very much.